And welcome back. President Trump's sweeping tariff hike on imports from India officially took effect today, with goods from the country now facing a 50% levy, one of the highest in the president's tariff toolkit. The rate was initially set at 25%, but was doubled to punish the country for purchasing Russian oil, as the White House tries to ramp up pressure on the Kremlin economically to reach a peace deal with Ukraine. Here's National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett earlier today.
And the bottom line is that we've had long trade negotiations with India. They haven't been particularly productive, and so it's still a work in progress to see where it's going to end up. But it's part of a program to put pressure on Russia to get a peace deal.
Well, the U.S. and India have yet to reach a bilateral trade deal despite holding 5 rounds of negotiations. And joining me now is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung and NBC News correspondent Daniele Hamamdjian. Thank you both so much for joining me. Brian, I want to start with you. What effect can we expect that this tariff increase will have on the economy and the cost of goods?
Well, Gabe, certainly going up from 25% to 50% is going to mean more staggering price increases on the many things that we bring in from India. This is not necessarily one of our top 5 trading partners, but as one of the more significant, especially fast-growing economies in the world, there are a number of imports that we get from India that now could be subject to these tariffs. When you think about things like textiles, electronics, machinery, as well as gems and jewelry. But I do want to point out there are 2 things that are not on this list that are worth mentioning as well. These are major exports from India to the United States, and that's pharmaceutical products as well as smartphones. So many drugs are made in India at a generic level, and the iPhone in many cases is made in India and then shipped to the United States. Those will not be subject to the 50% tariffs, and I want to point out that is because not necessarily of negotiations with India, but because of separate industry-specific tariffs that the Commerce Department is weighing on both of those industries, meaning that tariffs could be coming later, but they are not part of the tariffs that are being applied today.
You know, Brian, over at the White House, officials say that the president is always open to striking new deals, but really, are trade negotiations between the U.S. and India still ongoing? Could we see a reversal of this high tariff rate?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. But what we do know is that the administration is clearly not happy with India's purchasing of oil from Russia. That is kind of what sparked this whole thing, where the president a few weeks ago said, all right, well, if they don't stop those oil purchases, we're going to ratchet up the tariff rate from 25 to 50%. So whether or not those conversations are ongoing remain to be seen. Apparently, there were these reported summits that were supposed to take place in India with their U.S. counterparts. That did not happen this week, and that's why we are here where we are now with the tariff rates having gone up to 50%. But as you point out, and as you've been covering, Gabe, the administration seemingly always open to negotiations. So how long these are in effect is kind of the next question now that these are put into effect.
So higher tariffs on India, but as of now, no more economic sanctions on Russia anyway. Well, Brian, the U.S. has for years been working to improve relations with India as it sought to mitigate the rise of China. So does this tariff hike risk pushing India closer to China?
Yeah, well, look, when we talk about a lot of these trade negotiations, I think that we have a tendency to talk about things bilaterally, the United States and India buying things from Russia. But we have to remember that the entire trade network is extremely complex. And I think when we talk about India's relationship with China, it is within the context of what they're doing with Russia as well, because they're part of this economic alliance known as BRICS. It's an acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And by the way, even though those are the 5 nations that make up that acronym, there are a number of other countries around the world that align themselves with BRICS as well, seeing themselves as kind of these developing countries that can help each other out in lockstep. So to your point, yes, if negotiations with the United States don't end up in a good place, well, yes, India could just further tighten its already strong economic relationship with China, which again is part of an extension of the relationship that they have with Russia, with Brazil, with these other countries. And that's another reason why, by the way, another country that also faces 50%, it is Brazil. The BRICS relationship is very much a part of this.
Brian Cheung, thank you so much. Danielle, I want to turn to you. We just heard, as we mentioned, from White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett that this tariff hike is part of a pressure campaign on Russia to get a peace deal with Ukraine. Now, are there any signs from Russia that this will actually push them any closer to a deal?
Yeah, great question. And I suppose part of the answer depends on what India decides to do next. Russian officials have said in the last few days that they expect India to continue to buy Russian oil. We've heard also from the Russian trade representative in India in the past few days, and he says, and I quote here, definitely there are some mechanisms on how to continue to supply the supply of crude oil. From the Ukrainian perspective, Zelensky is clear. He says that Russia has given absolutely no signals that they want to stop this war. In fact, they are continuing this war, he says, because they want to avoid negotiations, and that can only change with strong sanctions and tariffs, which we're starting to see now.
You know, and Danielle, of course, we saw those high-profile meetings between Trump and Putin in Alaska, and then Trump and European leaders here in Washington over the last few weeks. But as you said, you know, peace talks seem to have currently stalled. At least, you know, we really haven't seen much movement. Now, the Ukrainian government reported today that Russian troops have pushed into a new region of Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
The Ukrainian military has acknowledged that the Russians have entered for the very first time the region of Dnipropetrovsk. This is a key area in the country. To the east, you've got Donetsk, which, of course, is occupied by Russia. And it's been reported, of course, that Putin told Trump that he would end the war if the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, gave up the areas he still controls, or Ukraine still controls, in Donetsk. Now, the Ukrainians claim the Russian forces have not managed to gain a foothold in this region that they've now entered, and that there is currently a lot of fighting going on. So we'll see how this unfolds in the next few days. In terms of the talks, we heard Vice President Vance over the weekend in an interview with Meet the Press, where he says, or he claims that the Russians have for the first time made concessions for the first time in 3.5 years, and that they are willing to be flexible on some of the core demands. He says that they've accepted that there's not going to be a puppet regime in Kyiv. He's also said that there is recognition now that Ukraine will have territorial integrity after this war ends. He did not specify, however, what the boundaries would look like in post-war Ukraine. Gabe.
And certainly that is, and always has been, a huge question. What will those boundaries be? Daniele Hamamdjian, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.